I, well, David, thank you so much for being here today. We have David Robson, playwright, who has written a new play that's being performed at City Theater Company. It's an original play with music called, and I need to get the whole name, Blues in My Soul, The Legend and Legacy of Lonnie Johnson. I got it right, didn't I?
You did.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being with me today and discussing your new play. So before we get into this production, can you tell me, how did you start writing plays? What led you to start write? And I know you write books too. So what was your journey to becoming a writer and play?
I'd always written, even starting in high school, I always had an interest in writing and creativity. I think in high school I was I was the co-editor of our literary magazine, and that's going back a few years. So I always had an interest, and right around the time I was in high school, my mom started taking me to Philadelphia Theater Company, which used to be on Delancey Place in Philadelphia. Now it's on Broad Street. And so she would take me, and it was kind of every couple months when they would put on a production, we'd go to see it. And so I really found a love for theater pretty early in my life. I acted in high school and was involved in theater there. So the theater bug kind of caught me early on. So I did a little acting here and there. When I was younger, I think I had a theatrical bent. I would listen to recorded records and then try to kind of mime, or mouth what was going on. I remember one, it was like David and Goliath, and I remember kind of mouthing the words to, I learned all the words that the story that the story told, or that was used in the story. And so I would just, I would kind of act it out. So I guess I always I'm a pretty quiet person, but I have that side of me that's a little more theatrical as well. And so back in the mid 90s, I started writing plays, and I started writing them mostly short plays, 10-minute plays. And I figured I'd try my hand at it. I had written poetry and other things. And because I love theater so much, I figured, let me try this. And I really enjoyed it. So I wrote a bunch of kind of silly 10-minute plays. And that's how I got started. And then a couple theater companies produced those, and that gave me a little confidence. And I said, let me try to write a full-length play. And so I tried to write a full-length play. It's one of those that you write and then you put in a drawer. It's not fit for eyes, but it was a beginning, and so then I tried to write another full-length play. And so little by little, I kind of found my way into it and figured out how it's done. I read books and I read plays, and that's kind of how you do. I guess that was my apprenticeship, right? So although you always feel like you're an apprentice, no matter how old you are and how many plays you've written. But that's kind of how I started. And again, what gave me the confidence was theater companies in the area and in Philadelphia did a few of them. And so that gave me confidence. And so, maybe I could do a little bit more. Let me do a little bit more. And so, it's climbing that hill. So that's how I got involved. But that's a long time ago.
That's great. And how many plays have you written?
Probably short plays, like 10-minute plays, probably 15. But then as I started writing more full-length plays, I lost interest in the shorter plays. So probably full-length plays, probably 12 or 14, something like that. And, some have been produced, some haven't been produced. It's tricky. You never know what's going to interest people. And so, I've had some success with some plays, and then other plays just never saw the light of day because although I tried to garner some interest, for whatever reason, it didn't hit. It's really a crapshoot. You put it out there and you hope somebody, or it's like fishing, right? You put it out there and you hope there's going to be a bite. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it's less, even from the beginning, it was less about getting them produced. Although, of course, theater, you want produced, you want people to see it. But I had this urge, this desire to write, to put words on a page, to, especially in a play, have people talk to one another and have the drama develop from that conversation or that drama contained in the words and the actions on stage. So I think because I always was good at imitating people as a kid, I kind of used that skill that I had, and that helped me get into the other people's heads, or at least try to, which is what you do when you write a play. You try to get into other characters' heads a little bit, speak from their point of view, which I find really appealing.
Mm-hmm. And now we're going to get to Blues in My Heart, but I'm just curious, what inspires you? How do you come up with the ideas for plays? Like, where does this all come from? It's always so intriguing to me, especially when I see an original production and it's like, wow, somebody had some life experience or heard of somebody else that had a life experience or read something to come up with this. Where do you usually find inspiration?
Well, from a young age, I had heard that William Faulkner, the famous American novelist, said that you kind of use what you know, what you have. And that interests me to some degree. But I tend to be interested not in myself, because I know myself as much as one can, but I'm interested in other people and other experiences. So, I've written about war, although I've never been in one. I've written from the point of view or with characters that would include women, and I'm not a woman. So I'm really interested in other people. So I'm inspired sometimes by things I read in the newspaper, and it plants a seed, or maybe I love history, so sometimes it's a nugget of history that I want to explore more in a dramatic fashion. So I tend to look outside myself, although in the end, with any writer, you're really writing based on your interests, the things that appeal to you, the things that you're curious about, the things that you have questions about. So, as we all walk through the world, for me, I tend to have questions like everybody, but then it takes the form of, among other things, people talking to one another, putting people in a room and discussing things, and building a drama that way. A couple of years ago, I wrote a play, and City Theater ended up doing it. It was a farce. And I'd never written a farce before. And I like farces, but the impulse from the play came from a nugget of history that I uncovered. And for some reason, I had this kind of mental lightning strike that told me, well, what could I do with this? I'll take this bit of truth and I can bend it, and I can play with it. I can toy with it. I can imagine it beyond what we know. And then that became a play. But I also knew I wanted to put it in the form of a farce, which is very exaggerated and silly. And so in that case, I had the nugget of history, but I also wanted to experiment with the farce form, because and it's really hard, I'd never tried it before. So it can be a variety of ways that one comes to it. Wrote a play a couple of years ago that Delaware Theater Company, among others, did, called Playing the Assassin. And that came from a newspaper story that I saw. When I was a kid, I was a football fan. And I happened to see an obituary of a football player whose football playing I knew from a kid. And the obituary was what sparked my interest in writing a play about a football player. And so I changed the name. I fictionalized it. So the ideas come from a million different places. Like, I have a list of ideas. Only a few of them end up making it into a play, because either I lose interest or I can't figure out how to do it. So, so a variety of ways, but usually not from my own experience, at least not directly. That's a rare thing for me to write about.
So how did you come to write about Lonnie Johnson? Where did this inspiration come from?
Yeah, in 2013, a friend of mine, a director friend of mine, directed a show at People's Light and Theater, which is out in Malvern, PA. And he invited me to come to see it. And he helped create the show. And it was a play about Bessie Smith, the famous blues singer. And I went to see it, enjoyed it very much, loved the music. And I remember coming home that night and saying, boy, I wonder if I could write something like that. So I kind of put that in the back of my mind, because I love music, I love drama. And I started reading about Bessie Smith. And through my reading, I uncovered the name of this guitarist who had worked with Bessie Smith. And his name was Lonnie Johnson. And I had never heard of him before. I consider myself kind of, even though I don't play, a music nerd. Love music, all kinds of music. Kind of, I think I could win Jeopardy if it was just music category stuff. And so as I read about this guy, Lonnie Johnson, I was a little blown away, because I found out that he was a real pioneer. He had started in the 19 teens and played with Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and Bessie Smith, with whom apparently he had an affair at some point. Found that out later. So he was a real pioneer in how the guitar was played at that time and how it was used in music at the time. It had been a background instrument. That was one minor thing, but he also had, relatively minor, he also wrote a lot of his music. Most of his music he wrote himself. And Elvis ended up recording some of his music. Bob Dylan ended up recording his music. Bob Dylan speaks of him as an influence early in Dylan's career. So the more I learned about this guy, the more fascinated I became. But it really just was just for my own edification. I was learning about this man's history and I listened to his music. And then I read about, it was just this bit of history that I stumbled upon in relation to him. And the bit of history was that by the 1950s, by the late 1950s, his music career had kind of fallen by the wayside. He couldn't really make a living anymore as a musician. He had most of his life until the late 50s. So he did it for a long time. But by 1959, he had moved to Philadelphia. He was born in Louisiana and then traveled all over the place. And he was living in Philadelphia because a friend had recommended the city as a great music town. But to make ends meet, this enormously talented, enormously influential blues man was working in the Benjamin Franklin Hotel as a janitor. And we all do what we have to do to make ends meet, to get by in life. But I was just bowled over by that contrast of his expertise, his mastery of his instrument, his amazing early career, and that, as he got older, he wasn't able to do that anymore. And he did what he had to support his family. But I thought the contrast was kind of fascinating. And then I found out that a Philly DJ at the time named Chris Albertson had gotten a tip when he was on the radio one day that Lonnie Johnson, who he knew about, was working at the Ben Franklin Hotel. And he wondered, Chris did, if this was the Lonnie Johnson, this amazing master of the guitar, the original guitar hero. So what did he do? He went to the Ben Franklin Hotel. He found this guy. And the story is that they became friends. They started recording together. Chris produced Lonnie's new albums. And Lonnie came back into prominence. That's how he met Bob Dylan and people like that, Joan Baez. So I just thought it was really fascinating. And I thought, what if I put these guys in a room and I somehow am able to use Lonnie Johnson's awesome blues music? And to be honest, I kind of forgot about it. It's another one I put in a drawer. I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this? I don't know how to get the guy's music. I'd have to pay for it, and et cetera, et cetera. And I was talking to Joe Trainer, the musical director at City Theater, about a year ago. And one of the things we ended up talking about was doing something together. And I said, well, I have this thing that I wrote like 5 or 6 years ago. I haven't done anything with it, but might you be interested? And so I sent it to him. He read it. He said he was interested. And that was how it all started. So what's pretty amazing is that something I put in a drawer thinking, yeah, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I won't get to it. Maybe it's just one of those that I'll forget about, has now become this thing. And so City Theater was kind enough and generous enough to produce the work, and it's in rehearsal right now.
Wow. Well, I love that you are bringing his story to the forefront and giving his story a platform so people will be able to learn about him. Because as you mentioned, Bob Dylan, Elvis Presley, and I've read others who were inspired by him, but yet we don't know his story. And yes,
right.
And so to have that opportunity to learn about the man who inspired all these legends, these people became legendary icons of the music industry. He is at the core of, their start, of their inspiration, it sounds like, of what he was able to do back in the early 1900s and while he was working with, many jazz greats too. And I love that
he was.
story is coming to the forefront. Now, the story that you've written, is this
Mhm.
based on an actual situation where the two met, or is this kind of like you're giving us a dramatic kind of look of what might have been discussed during a meeting of theirs?
Well, interesting that you ask, because one of the things that, to be honest, Chris Albertson didn't end up writing a lot about
Mhm.
is he didn't really end up writing much about, well, what happened when they first met. And so, for example, Carrie Christine, who is the artistic director at City Theater, she happened to bring in this great resource a week or two ago in rehearsal. And it was Chris Albertson writing about the whole Lonnie Johnson thing, most of which I knew, but I'd never read this version of the story. And he never tells us what happened when he showed up at the hotel and he said, "Hi, are you Lonnie Johnson?" And Lonnie Johnson, eventually somehow they came together. Eventually somehow they found some kind of connection. But Albertson didn't really write about what they spoke of. So to answer your question, the play is an invention. I hope a well-informed invention because of the research I've done and just because of my imagination and I hope my dramatic skill, that it's an imagined meeting. Because it's hard for me to believe, and maybe I'm the fool, which is very likely, that Chris Albertson, a white man, showed up at the hotel, which was, by the way, very much a segregated hotel, even in 1959. And Lonnie Johnson would have been just, yeah, sure, why not? My suspicion is, I'm thinking human nature here, that my guess is that Lonnie Johnson must have wanted to know, well, who are you? Why are you here? I kind of put that life away because it wasn't successful for me anymore. And I love music still, and I still write songs, but does anybody really care? I'm an relatively old man at this point. So that's where the conflict has to come in, because, it's a play without conflict, without people disagreeing, without people, if not at loggerheads and arguing, at least they want slightly different things, and they have to find a way to come together to make that connection. That's the heart of drama, at least as I write it, because that's what keeps you interested in the play and kind of what moves you through the play as an audience. So that part is invented. And so that's why I've written many drafts. I wish I had like a transcript of it, you know what I mean? That said, he said this, and then he said that. Although as a playwright, you could do a play like that. I kind of prefer to invent it because it's fun for me to invent, well, what might they say and why? And trying to figure all that out is
Sure.
part of the fun.
Sure. And like you said, you're basing it on the research you did. So it's based on factual
It
information
is.
about him, but just in this setting that happened, but maybe didn't exactly happen this way.
Right. Research can only take you so far. There's a point at which, as a writer, and I love research, but there's a point at which you just have to abandon the research and dive in, because you don't want it to be a history play. You don't want it to be, because they're wonderful history plays. Shakespeare wrote an awesome bunch of them, but that's not really my interest in writing a history play. And even Shakespeare's history plays, they're based on. Many of them happened long before he was born. So he's basing those quote unquote history plays on some conjecture as well. And that's unless I'm doing a docudrama, which is just a different kind of play, invention is going to be part of it by its very nature. But also, I had to keep in mind the time period. So much of the world, at least in the United States, was segregated. Schools were starting to be desegregated. Music, to some degree, to a large degree, was still segregated. There were white radio stations, there were black radio stations, and so it was a very different time in terms of how there wasn't a lot of crossover. So, for example, someone would take Lonnie Johnson's song, let's say a white performer, and he or she would make that into a hit. The famous example is, Elvis Presley's famous song, Hound Dog, one of his early hits. That's a song that was first recorded by a woman named Big Mama Thornton. And the idea was, okay, you do it, Elvis, because we can now sell it to a white audience. There wasn't quite that understanding that, and maybe America wasn't ready for it at the time, that white audiences would be interested in quote unquote black music. I'm not sure that record executives quite got that yet. There was some of that, there was crossover, people like Nat King Cole and groups like the Platters, but it still wasn't all that common as it is today, so yeah.
Sure. Now, the two actors, so you
Mhm.
have the actor playing Lonnie and the actor playing the DJ.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about the actors who are going to be performing these roles, a little bit about them? I know Joe Trainer is the director, and you mentioned him
Yeah.
earlier, but I'm interested in how they're doing with finding these characters and becoming these two men who actually lived, real
Yes.
men.
Both men are dead. Lonnie died in 1970. And Chris Albertson died in 2019, not all that long ago. And so, right, it's based on real people. And so in terms of the actors, Righteous Jolly plays Chris Albertson, the DJ who rediscovers Lonnie. And Righteous was in Once. I first met Righteous last April. We had a reading of this play, Blues in My Soul. And I met Righteous then, and he's just such a great, enthusiastic partner in the theater. He very much commits himself, and which is wonderful. And then we were looking for a Lonnie. We got a tip from Righteous, in fact, about a great guitar player who lived near him that he knew a little bit, but not all that well, named Joe Beckett. And so Joe came to audition for us, and he played one of Lonnie's songs as an audition, and he just knocked it out of the park. He was just wonderful. And I was like, whoa, this is great. And they both have a lot of charisma. They'll be a perfect match, I think, because I've been to the rehearsal, so I definitely think. And they're really working it, and I was in rehearsal a few days ago. I wasn't there Tuesday night, but, they're finding their way. And so part of it is, finding your way. What is this script? Who is this character? What are the different beats of the play as things turn from point A to point B? And then on top of that, these two talented people have music that they need to learn. You could do this play without guitar players, because plays like this have been done before, where they have a guitar player behind the scenes playing the guitar and the actor mimes it. But in this case, we're lucky enough to have two talented singers and guitarists. So this is the real thing. This is the real McCoy. They play, they sing, they act, they do it all. And I'm just so excited with the work that they're doing and them helping me bring it to life. And it sounds really corny, but it's really moving, because I've learned so much about Lonnie Johnson, and I've had indirect contact with his surviving family. And they're so excited because although he was a great guitar hero, as we talked about, he's not well known, unfortunately. And the fact that I was writing this play or had written this play excited them very much. And I sent it to them and they were way on board. And to see Lonnie Johnson, or a version of him after, being in my head for all this time, to see it portrayed in Joe's portrayal is just, I'm finding it really moving. Even if you don't know who this guy is, by the end of the play, his story, and the music is so rich, and you just pull for this guy because he's just such a likable character and such a talent.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am so excited to see this. It sounds amazing. I know I love your work. The plays I've seen that you've written have all been amazing, and I know this is going to be too.
Thanks, Abby.
Learned something, about musical history, which is very exciting too. And so I want to just put out there before we end, this is being performed by City Theater Company. It's March 18th and 19th and 25th and 26th at the Delaware Contemporary.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then and just one last thing, which is kind of cool. My hope is everybody comes to see it at City Theater. They're a wonderful group of people. I've worked with them many times. The cool thing is the play is going to continue to have a life in the fall as well, at a theater company a bit far from here. But it's really cool. And my hope is that more theaters take it on, because it's a wonderful play about community and music, and how, especially in this very divided time, that music can kind of connect us all. And it'll be awesome to get into the theater and sit there with other people. I've done it a couple times since the pandemic, and, toward the end of it. And it's just so thrilling to be in a theater and to get to have that communal experience,
Oh,
And
definitely.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh, no, no, no. That was great. I'm so happy to hear that it's continuing after this
Yes.
production closes. Because I feel like this is a show that needs to be seen. People need to learn about Lonnie Johnson and his contribution to the musical world, pop culture history, American history,
No doubt.
So that's great.
100%. Well, thank you. It's good
Oh,
to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you so much. This is exciting. I'll be seeing you on opening night. I can't wait.
Woohoo! It's not that far away. I'm getting a little scared.
I'm sure
Nerves.
it's going to be fantastic. So much fun.
Thank you. And yes, well, I'll see you soon. Thank you again, and see you at opening night.
Yes, thank you. It's awesome.
Bye.
So